Hey gang, I'm going to show you something a little bit crazy today, but I think you're going to find it very, very helpful. I'm going to give you a bunch of free things also today to do this by yourself. So watch this. We're in a special level of my Wizards Tower release. It just came out. This is level 11, and I'm clicking this macro, and the terrain is changing dynamically. Not just like the base terrain, but like overlays like rivers and ponds and rocks and overgrowth. And if I click this a million times, I won't get the same image. So I call this unlimited terrain, and it has the power to basically serve as an instant map base, kind of your starting point, and let you add tiles and prefabs like this campfire and like this tree, and you're basically ready. And you'll find the terrains themselves will inspire you what to design, right? So here's like grassy and hills, rocky, deadlands, swamps, deserts, and even oceans and shorelines. So, to start, everything you'll see here is part of the latest Baileywiki release. It's a huge modular system, not only for creating these trains, but also for creating these big wizard towers in the style of kind of a dungeon crawl. So, this works with all my other modular systems. You can see all the rest of the Baileywiki library at work in it. It comes with 13 levels already made, which you can also customize because they're all just made out of tiles, but you can make an infinite number of levels. And if you want these assets, you can get this and all my other basic Foundry content for just $8 on my Patreon, which I'll link here. So not all of the combinations make sense, of course, but most of them do. And what we're doing is essentially panning and zooming around large tileable images. And these are AI generated terrain and basically making unique terrain maps every single time. And because I'm also sourcing and randomizing multiple source images too, there's probably like a billion unique combinations here. So the way we generated this unlimited terrain is by using these assets you see here. And these were all generated using mostly Midjourney, but also some other tools. In this tutorial, I'll give you the important prompts to create the basics yourself, specifically the prompt to make things tileable, and I'll also give you my free Foundry macro that you can use to create your own. If you want the more advanced stuff with overlays, you'll have to do a lot more image processing. And if you want to avoid all that, please feel free to get my stuff on my basic Foundry tier. So special thanks to Kaiser Bear on Discord for inspiring me on this topic. Their suggestion for doing a tutorial on tileable prompts is what catalyzed a lot of this work. And I also got this idea from Ripper, who's already made this kind of pan zoom functionality in 3D Canvas module. So if you haven't used 3D Canvas, you can generate terrains super randomly. It's really quick and effective, and you can alter them after the fact. And that exists today. And so I basically took that idea and said, I bet we can do this on the 2D side as well. Okay, so these are the assets that we're going to use for this exercise, and let's examine these. If I zoom in on this grassy landscape, I can see it's a large top-down view. And what you may not notice is that it's tileable. Where this side ends, it matches perfectly with the other side. This means that if we could randomly zoom in on a section of the image and it was tiled, we could always have a complete terrain before us. So this is the key to everything here working, right? Tileable images. So before we move on, I just want to show you how I generated many of these. So using Midjourney, you can use the following prompt as sort of a template, right? So I'm saying rolling hills from above, flat lay, high resolution, photorealistic, and then these modifiers at the end. So dash dash AR space 16:16, that's going to give us a square image. And then dash dash V space 5, it's going to use version 5 of Midjourney. And then really important, the dash dash tile. That's going to make the resulting image tileable. So don't worry, I will post this whole thing, this whole prompt in the video description. You can go copy it from there. So the keywords are from above, flat lay, right? These are going to give you that kind of top-down view. The square dimensions, which we care about, and then the tileable piece. And you may need to generate multiple attempts, right? You may get some weird results. You have to keep generating them, iterating on ones that work, and feel free to add other modifiers until you get the style of how you like it, right? So you can use things like deadlands instead of hills, or prairies and things like that. The goal is to generate a great image that ideally has lots of variation and cool kind of different areas when you zoom in, right? So like ridges and clearings and paths and plateaus, things like that. You can use, like I said, a similar process to making overlays like ponds and rivers, but it's labor intensive enough that I won't get into it here. And you really kind of have to have some skills in Clip Studio or Photoshop, things like that to make that work as well. So now that we have our tileable terrains, let's get into the Foundry stuff. First, you're going to need the latest TokenMagic effects module and also the free version of Mass Edit to give you basically a UI to manipulate your TokenMagic filters, especially when we apply a terrain and want to make some adjustments later. If you understand the basic JavaScript and kind of know your way around macros, I'm only a novice at it, but you can also just use my free macro that I'll put in the nuts and bolts module. And you can just change the values in that macro as well. You'll also want the TokenMagic Effects Edit macro, TMFX Edit, that I have in my nuts and bolts module. That once you have Mass Edit installed, that'll give you the ability to edit these terrains after you set them up. And these are all free. Nuts and bolts is free, right? But so we've got this image applied, but now we want to do something cool. We want to randomly pan and zoom around this overlay image to essentially change the terrain. So to do that, we're going to search for the, again, in the TokenMagic Effects portfolio, for a filter called Randomization Example. So here it is. Let's make a copy and call it My Random Terrain. And now let's change some of these values. So first, let's randomize our image to a couple of our images here. And we'll delete the rest, make sure we have our commas in the right place. And then let's randomize our zoom level and remove the other randomization. So I'll set my scaleX to like my value 1 of 0.8, and I'll scale up to 1.6, like kind of zoom level, right? And that's the scale of the image. And then notice that it's linking to scaleY, and my step is going to be 0.01. So that's going to be a lot of variation between those two values of 0.8 and 1.6, but it'll also make sure that my Y scale matches my X, and that'll scale the image properly. The rotation, I'm going to change from 0 to 0, and alpha, I'm going to change from 1 to 1. I don't want to zero those out. I may want to use those later in my samples, but I'm going to go ahead and make those not vary in this case. If I change my rotation, you'll notice, Midjourney will give you sort of a sun direction, and it'll change then the sun direction. I just kind of like to keep it in one sort of stationary position. And then alpha, I always want it to be a clear picture. Now I'm going to add randomization of our panning, right? So I'm going to add two new calculations here. I'm going to add translationX and translationY. Now I'm going to put all of these things in quotes because it seems to work better for me. You guys can try it another way. Somebody who knows JavaScript can tell me what's proper and what isn't, but I'm putting these in quotes. Translation X, even my value 1, value 2 in quotes. And then, so just follow along with me. I'll put these again in the description so you can copy this yourself, or you can just go pull down my sample macros from nuts and bolts. But in the case of translation, I want to go from -1 to +1. And I'm going to use a step of 0.01. I'm going to do the same with translation Y. I don't have to have those linked because I want to pick kind of random coordinates between those. But this will basically, if they were both at 0, it'd be at the center of the image. So -1 and +1 just pans around to different parts of the image. So now that we have our filter with randomization, let's see what happens when we apply it to our tile. Cool, right? So we're getting entirely different maps, and depending on the dimensions of my underlying tile, like this can cover any size area, right? So this could be a huge map, and I can have little tiny buildings in there, or it can be a very, very small map. And so it's the same image, and it scales really well. Okay, so that's like all the foundation that we really need, right? So using this same method, I created a huge macro built with all these little macros, and I coded the randomization options into it. So this macro is one that you can get from my nuts and bolts. So let's examine the macro. So first, I use unique filter IDs for each layer that I want to edit and randomize and basically apply some kind of image to, right? So these filter IDs give that filter a name, right? So basic terrain, or overgrowth 1, or overgrowth 2, or grass, or rivers. These are the sort of the layers that I want to be able to manipulate, even if I'm using different macros for it. So I'm going to stay with the same name. Second, because by the way, if you use the same name, it'll replace that filter. If you don't, then it'll add to the tile and add a new filter on top. So I want to maintain the same kind of naming conventions. Second, each layer gets a specific Z order priority, right? So water bodies and rivers are always on top, for example. And so I'm particular about which filter ID gets what order. Because again, I want to be able to change these, and I want rivers to not like do weird things like flow under trees and stuff like that. Next, in addition to randomizing the source images, I added a few blank PNGs to the mix just to randomize the percentage of time that an overlay feature would even show up at all, right? So I can add more blank PNGs if I want to decrease the number of times that they'll randomly show up. If you want to use this yourself, just comment off the sections that you want to skip or remove or add the tile references. Or if you JavaScript wizards want to clean up my work, I would not complain at all. Feel free to post in my Discord a cleaner version of all of this. I'm sure there's much better ways to do this, but this is pretty effective. So let's look at the results. Okay, again, as long as I maintain the same filter IDs across filters, those filters will always replace an existing asset rather than add new layers. So because of that, I made all these custom macros that can only randomize a particular layer, right? So I can randomize, if I have something that I like, but I want to change the river, I can just change the river randomly using these different macros. Okay, so now let's say that I have a terrain that I like, but I want to make some modifications. Now, I use my TokenMagic Effects Edit macro. It's found in my free nuts and bolts module, and it shows me all the layers. So I can reorder them, I can turn them off or on, or move them around, scale them. So let's change this river, for example. Right, so we'll change some of our variables here, and we'll move it around until we have one that we like. Okay, so almost done. What do we do from here? Well, now I can drag in some prefab trees, right? I can place a campsite or a tower or, a house in the woods. I can even add more terrain tiles, right? So you guys have seen some of my terrain tiles in my past release. So I can add some grassy area. I can even add then elevation changes, right? And make this super tactical. I can use elevated vision module, and I can, put walls all around this thing, and then set the elevation. And now I've got a really cool tactical map that I created in just a few minutes. Again, it can scale to very large scenes, very small. You can even apply it to non-square dimension tiles, but you just have to adjust the X or Y scale so it doesn't stretch. And actually, there is support for non-square tiles, I think, coming soon. It's in the test version from ADIF for TokenMagic Effects, but we'll also be able to, hopefully soon, be able to just apply an image to any shape tile, and it won't stretch that image out. So that's really it. I hope you guys don't waste all of the time this next weekend jumping into the rabbit hole of this, but hey, I can't blame you if you did. Honestly, I've clicked on this macro so many times. I can't stop doing it. I get some kind of dopamine hit every time it comes up with something cool that I want to make a map out of. So I even applied it to like the base of the Magic Tower, right? So I can have this tower be in some Badlands or some beautiful rolling hills or whatever. And I just like the idea of being able to do that. And I can take this background for this tower, and it's just a single tile, and I can put it anywhere and randomize it anywhere else. I do have a template that you guys can use in my release as well if you want to just come in and start randomly generating maps with it. So let me know in the comments what you think, if I skipped something critical or if it generates more questions or even ideas. But now I kind of feel like I can create completely random quality maps in just a couple of minutes with no prep time at all. And that's kind of the goal, right? I hope you had fun learning with me, and I hope you have fun making your maps.